Good afternoon, everyone, and may I remind members that social distancing measures are in place in the Chamber and across the campus. So please take care to observe these measures over the course of this afternoon's business, including when entering and exiting the Chamber. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 21913 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau and its referral of SSIs. Would any member who wishes to speak against the motion press the request to speak button now? I call on Graham Day to move the motion.
Moved, Presiding Officer.
No member has asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 21913 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. The motion is therefore agreed. And the next item of business is a statement by Michael Russell on Brexit. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And the Cabinet Secretary is joining us remotely. I call on Michael Russell for up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, in the referendum in June 2016, people in Scotland voted overwhelmingly to be part of the European Union. That preference has been reinforced in two subsequent UK general elections and in a European Parliament election. Yet on January the 31st this year, the Conservative UK government took Scotland out of the European Union. At the time, they said this was getting Brexit done, but of course it is not done. All that has been agreed was the terms of withdrawal. Nothing has been agreed regarding the future relationship between the UK and the EU. Today, I want to update Parliament on the Scottish Government's view of the current negotiations on that future relationship. And let me start by saying that we believe it is not and will not be possible to conduct and conclude these negotiations and implement the results within the truncated timescales set for them and within the context of an unprecedented global pandemic and a catastrophic economic recession, which may turn out to be the worst in 300 years. In our view, it is essential that the UK indicate that it will seek the extension of the transition period for up to 2 years, which is provided for in the withdrawal agreement. To refuse to seek that extension, which the EU have indicated would be readily granted, is a reckless act, which will destroy thousands of jobs, undermine an already fragile economy, and devastate communities across Scotland at a time when we are most vulnerable. After the end of this month, it will not be possible to extend under the terms of the withdrawal agreement, and no other plausible route to an extension has been put forward. The deadline at the end of June is therefore real. Today, the Scottish Government publishes a new paper which sets out the consequences of refusing to seek such an extension. I shall outline its findings in a moment, but let me first describe to Parliament the highly unsatisfactory state of the current negotiations and unsatisfactory engagement with them. The original end date for these talks was set when the intention of the UK government was to leave the EU at the end of March 2019. That period of 21 months looked very challenging even then. But of course, the UK did not leave the EU for another 10 months. So 21 months has become 11 months. And that time has been further truncated by the effects of the pandemic. So far, there have been only 3 weeks of negotiation, with a 4th round currently underway. The UK negotiating only published on the 27th of February. The draft UK legal texts on which the negotiations are meant to be based were only made available to the other EU nations 2 weeks ago. We had virtually no involvement in producing them, and indeed only saw the legal text with no possibility of changing them 24 hours before they were published. The Joint Ministerial Committee on European Negotiation is, by its agreed and written remit, meant to have oversight of these negotiations insofar as the effect of competences and I quote, to seek to agree the UK position. In fact, it has met only once since the discussion started in a virtual session on the 21st of May. It previously met in Cardiff on the 28th of January. The UK Paymaster General has conducted 3 sets of briefings with devolved ministers. Despite our efforts, that whole process isn't about influencing what is happening, still less deciding on crucial issues for which we are responsible. It is merely about hearing what is happening. But what is clear, even from these meetings, is that a no-deal outcome has become ever more likely. That's not just because the UK has set its face against accepting a more realistic and sensible timescale. It's also because the negotiations have been so unproductive in accessing the political gulf in positions. The negotiations are blocked on fundamental issues of governance, of level playing field and on fisheries, and in a way that no technical finessing will remedy. Indeed, to many in Brussels, it looks as if the UK is refusing to.
Oh dear. I think we'll give it a short while to see if we can get Mr. Russell back. He has returned. Welcome, Mr. Russell.
My apologies for that. As I was saying, the negotiations are blocked on fundamental issues of governance, of level playing field and on fisheries, and in a way that no technical finessing will remedy. Indeed, to many in Brussels, it looks as if the UK is refusing to negotiate on such key matters. Resolution seems to be far off. The situation was not helped by an extraordinary letter from David Frost, the UK chief negotiator, to his counterpart Michel Barnier. We have long been opposed to the substance of the UK position, but the tone of this confrontational letter was an error of even greater proportions. I made it clear at the JMC that in using it, Mr. Frost did not speak for Scotland, and I do so again now. He certainly does not speak for Scotland in his desire to secure the most unambitious of trade deals, sometimes called a low deal, failing which he seems to be entirely prepared to accept a no deal. It will be no surprise to the Chamber that the Scottish Government believes that the best future for Scotland is to be an independent member of the EU. Others in this place differ, but that's not the point at issue today. The imminent danger lies in the failure of the UK to seek an extension coupled with their drive towards a no deal or low deal outcome. In April, Jackson Carlaw said he was a pragmatist on this matter. I hope he still is, for pragmatically the issue is clear. There must be an extension to allow people and businesses in Scotland to continue to benefit from most aspects of the EU membership whilst they attempt to recover from the current crisis. In order to flesh out this very strong case, the Scottish Government has today published a detailed examination of the damage that proceeding with Brexit at this time will cause. For a start, there are thousands of practical problems in day-to-day business procedures, such as inspection and customs regimes to take into account if transition is to end in less than 7 months' time. Even if we knew today the nature of the many agreements are required, this would be an impossible challenge. But we do not know about any of them. Bluntly, therefore, it is now absurd to continue to pretend otherwise. As Caroline Fairbairn of the CBI wrote in an op-ed for yesterday's Politico, for many firms fighting to keep their heads above water through the crisis, the idea of preparing for a chaotic change in EU trading relations in 7 months is beyond them. They are not remotely prepared. Faced with the desperate challenges of the pandemic, their resilience and ability to cope is almost zero. Almost zero. And yet the UK government is pressing ahead. There are also many grave difficulties for government and wider society. To take just one, the technical changes required to the way that Scotland can access information in European Criminal Records Information System, if access of some kind is in the end negotiated, would take months to design and implement. But any gap in coverage would have a serious effect on Scottish ministers' vetting and barring functions under the Protection of Vulnerable Groups Act 2007. That is a crucial element in the protection of children and vulnerable adults. Moreover, this is just one new system to deliver one part of the arrangements or one part of the future relationship. Many, many more are required across the breadth of areas where UK and Scotland cooperate with the EU. These issues are also having to be considered against the background of a global pandemic, where the finite resources of both the UK and Scottish governments have rightly concentrated on responding to the health emergency. We will have to continue to try to save lives, but we will also have to divert some of our scarce resources into frantic and well-nigh impossible preparations for whatever new relationship with the EU will be thrust upon us at the end of the year. We'll be doing so in the teeth of an economic downturn, the like of which none of us have ever seen. The global economy, including the Scottish economy, is declining fast. We must do everything we can to give businesses the best support for recovery. The next couple of years will be crucial. But ending the EU withdrawal transition period at the end of this year would subject Scotland and the UK as a whole to an entirely unnecessary second economic and social shock on top of the COVID-19 crisis. More jobs would be lost, living standards would be hit, and essential markets and opportunities for recovery would be damaged. For many businesses which managed to survive the COVID-19 crisis, this second Brexit shock would be the final straw. The new modelling we published today indicates that ending transition this year would result in Scottish GDP being between 1.1 billion and 1.8 billion lower by 2022, compared with ending transition at the end of 2022. This would be equivalent to a cumulative loss of economic activity of between nearly £2 billion and £3 billion over 2 years. A proportionate impact would be likely for the UK economy. That would obviously hamper recovery from the impact of the pandemic. But beyond this, and in addition to the economic impacts identified, exiting the current transition period before Scotland has emerged from the COVID-19 crisis would actually increase the cost of Brexit to the Scottish economy in comparison to a 2-year extension. And ending the transition period will have further direct impact. There will be lost opportunities to participate in EU-funded programmes, including for COVID and health-related research and procurement. Just last week, the EU Commission proposed a new standalone health programme, EU for Health, aiming to support post-COVID recovery. And given the contribution of EU nationals to our health and social care sector, never has the ending of freedom of movement looked more damaging and inappropriate. Presiding Officer, I understand that many businesses and communities across Scotland have been focused 100% in tackling the immediate impact of coronavirus, but extending the transition should be seen not as a separate event, but as part and parcel of the recovery effort from COVID. In fact, the one action we could all agree on, which would have no adverse effect on the R number, but would protect our economy from severe damage, would be this one. During this crisis, despite our different beliefs, we have come together as a Parliament to help Scotland get through this. Today, I hope we can send a message to the UK government in that same spirit of consensus. Do not inflict further unnecessary damage and agree on an extension with our EU partners now, before it is too late. Thank you.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement, and I will allow around 20 minutes for that. Would members who wish to ask a question please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Murdo Fraser.
Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Sadly, both it and the related document are just another in the endless series of doleful pronouncements from the SNP government on Brexit. Presiding Officer, this is the Cabinet Secretary who spent last year telling us that there would be no withdrawal agreement, that the UK would be leaving on a no-deal basis, and that the UK government were not even involved in serious negotiations. He was wrong on every single one of these claims, and he'll be proved wrong again. Presiding Officer, a further delay will achieve nothing but deliver years more of access to our fishing waters for the other EU nations, when our fishing communities are desperate to seize the sea of opportunity that awaits us. Now, Presiding Officer, it is true that negotiations are proving difficult. But then these talks need two willing parties. What is preventing talks proceeding now is not intransigence on the part of the UK government, but on the part of the EU 27, who are demanding unrestricted access to our fishing waters as a precondition for further discussions. There is no pragmatism on display on their side. So my question to the Scottish Government is a simple one. Whose side are they on? Are they backing the EU 27 and supportive of abandoning our fishing communities, or will they stand with us in demanding that the EU back down and keep their hands off our fishing waters?
Michael Russell.
I'm fascinated, Presiding Officer, to see Murdo Fraser adopting what you might call the Cummings gambit in this, which is just to plough on regardless of what other people are thinking, and no matter the damage that is being done, even to your own cause. It is an extraordinary approach, but I suppose it's what one would expect from the Tories these days. I'll be very happy to answer the question about fishing. Strangely enough, I think the Secretary of State for Scotland was put up to ask me the same question at the JMC 2 weeks ago, and I'll give you the same answer. I'm on Scotland's side. I'm on the side of the Scottish fishermen who need a good deal, and they won't get a good deal from the blustering and positioning that the UK has put in. There needs to be genuine negotiation, but everybody who watches this knows there isn't genuine negotiation. As far as Mr Fraser's other remarks are concerned, can I just say facts are chiels that one a ding? If he reads the paper, he will discover the facts of the matter. It would be best he looks at those facts and thinks about them rather than takes the knee-jerk Cummings position.
Before we go on to Mr Rowley, I know it's tempting for people to hold conversations while there's some poor soul on the screen doing their very, very best to answer your questions. So please do the courtesy of listening to the answers. Alex Rowley.
Presiding Officer, as the Cabinet Secretary said, after the end of this month it will not be possible to extend under the terms of the withdrawal agreement. I have read the paper that the Scottish Government published this morning, and I have to say that the analysis and likely impacts of a poor or no-deal Brexit can and will be devastating for Scottish businesses and Scottish jobs. And that is why Labour in this Parliament will join with all parties who want to put the interests of Scottish business and Scottish jobs before the interest of a Conservative elite in Downing Street. Scotland is on the brink of an economic crisis that will be devastating for families up and down Scotland. Now that the UK have left the European Union, it is crucial we get a deal that would give us access to European markets and close alignment with the Customs Union. That is why Scottish Labour supports the call for the negotiation period to be extended. Will the Cabinet Secretary use his powers and the powers of the Scottish Government to build consensus across Scotland for an extension? And does he agree if the Scottish Tories put Johnson's interests before the people of Scotland's interests, then they should be exposed for that?
Michael Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I say that I agree with Alex Rowley? I think the Scottish Tories are already exposed in their behaviours. I noticed that there was no word of pragmatism in what Murdo Fraser said, despite that was a term that had been used by the Scottish Tory leader just a few weeks ago. I'm very happy that we continue to build consensus. I do believe that there is an overwhelming consensus in Scotland, and polling bears this out, that opposes the withdrawal at this time. It wishes to see an extension, but the clock is ticking on that, and it has to be done during June. So I hope that we will all work together, and I would welcome the Tories in this if they were prepared to be pragmatic to make sure that that extension takes place. And I'd be very happy to work with Alex Rowley on that basis, of course.
We'll go on to the open questions, and can I remind people to press their button, and we'll have Patrick Harvey followed by Willie Rennie.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for the advance copy of the statement, and the Scottish Greens certainly agree that the extension to the transition period is very clearly necessary. And it comes as no surprise that the same people who brought us the profoundly dishonest and xenophobic Brexit campaign are the same individuals who have deliberately burned whatever little public trust the UK government had in the COVID crisis by saying clearly that the rules don't apply to them. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us whether the UK government has yet given any clarity to the Scottish Government on who will pay for the infrastructure, both primary and secondary infrastructure, between Scotland and Northern Ireland, which is only going to be necessary because of the UK government's insistence of maintaining a Brexit position outside of the single market and the customs union? If they've made that position clear, they should be funding the infrastructure that will result from the requirement for a customs border in the Irish Sea.
Michael Russell.
It is. I thank the member for that question. It is, of course, important that the Northern Ireland Assembly yesterday voted in favour of an extension, and indeed the Welsh Government and I believe the Welsh Assembly will also indicate the same position. So we are once again in that position where 3 out of the 4 countries are saying this should not happen. They have an enormous amount of evidence on their side, well-attested evidence. We've published evidence today. But the UK government, as you say, does not wish to listen to evidence. It doesn't wish to listen to other points of view. It simply wishes to pursue its own agenda, a highly damaging agenda. In terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, there are many reasons why an extension would also benefit the situation with the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is quite clear that with 7 months left, there is still a vast amount to be done to implement that protocol, and it is simply not happening. But the same principle applies, as I've said before to the member in the chamber. We will not pay for the infrastructure that is required here. There's no reason why we should pay for it. That has to be paid for by the UK government. But it would be far, far better if there was a sense of realism in the UK government and a sense also of how people are actually feeling. It's not just in Scotland. that there is opposition, as I've said, but also in opinion polls. Throughout the UK, in opinion polls, there is strong support, majority support, for seeking an extension which is on offer. And that extension is also sought by the EU, who have made it clear that if it is asked for, it will be granted.
Willie Rennie, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Yesterday I wrote to all party leaders inviting them to send a joint letter to the UK Government to extend the Brexit negotiations. But I have been rejected by Jackson Carlo. He says the Government can do two things at once. Yes, that's true, but Brexit is not some minor piece of legislation. It's the biggest change to our constitutional, political and economic framework in decades. It needs careful negotiation, and it is reckless to carry on in the middle of a global pandemic. If the leader of the Scottish Conservatives won't, will the Cabinet Secretary agree to a joint approach to the UK Government?
Michael Russell.
Yes, I'm happy to agree to that. I think it's a sensible thing to do. Of course, that was what took place at Westminster recently, with a number of parties joining together, and I'm happy to commit the Scottish Government, the SNP and the Scottish Government to that action. I'm intrigued by Jackson Carlo's argument that the Government can do two things at once. It's perfectly possible to do two bad things at once, and that is what we're talking about. It's inflicting two sets of damage, because we know the inevitable damage that is going to come from COVID. The paper outlines that very clearly, using your figures which were well accepted. But adding to that is a damage of Brexit. And it is not necessarily a good thing that you do two bad things at once. You could actually try to mitigate one of the bad things by doing a good thing. So Jackson Carlo's argument is, I'm afraid, empty. It is threadbare. And what Jackson Carlo needs to do is to go back to the April Jackson Carlo and think of pragmatism and try and take a pragmatic view. We know from the experience of the Cummings event, it takes a little bit of time for Jackson Carlo to get where he really should be. Let's hope it's not too long, because the clock is ticking.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, irrespective of the politics of Brexit, is it rational or reasonable that businesses currently struggling day and daily to survive the COVID-19 pandemic should be subjected by the UK Tory government to the further economic shock of EU exit this December, with all the job losses that will entail? Surely rather we should take the opportunity of the protections of a transition period for up to 2 years, one that could so easily be agreed, such that we could give vital breathing space to our economy.
Michael Russell.
I entirely agree with the member. It is irrational and unreasonable for the UK government to pursue this course of action. And I do hope that rationality and reason will prevail, because otherwise there will be companies that cannot survive this. Companies that would have survived one shock but cannot survive two shocks. And that will be the fault of those who pursue this. There's no ifs and buts about that. That will be their fault, because there's an action they could have taken which would have helped, would have saved those companies. They're not only refusing to take it, they're doubling down on that refusal.
Oliver Mundell, followed by Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Doesn't it just give the game away that the only people who want to delay Brexit are the people who didn't want it to happen in the first place? So rather than wasting everyone's time and attempting to dress his latest Ramon Fest up as helpful negotiating advice, would the Cabinet Secretary not be better admitting he simply doesn't want Brexit to happen, and he is perfectly happy, whatever he says, to leave Scotland's fishermen stranded in the common fisheries policy forever?
Michael Russell.
I'd ask Oliver Mundell to raise his eyes a little and to look round his own constituency and to look at those businesses that will not survive because of the action that he is supporting. That is the additional burden of Brexit upon businesses that are already flat out because of COVID. I notice he and Murdo Fraser keep calling in aid Scottish fishermen. I've made it clear I want to see a good deal for Scottish fishermen. But they too will be disadvantaged by an economy which will be even worse if the government he supports at Westminster goes ahead from this. I'd also point out to him a factual inaccuracy in what he said. There are a substantial number of leavers who are in the opinion polls saying that there should be a delay. So to characterise this in the way he has is simply in error. He needs to look very carefully at what he's saying but he should look most of all at the people he knows around him in his own constituency. They don't want this to happen, but unfortunately, if he supports it happening, then he will be responsible for the damage that is done.
Bruce Crawford, followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, how would you respond to reports that the UK Government are considering power grab of responsibilities the Scottish Government currently has in regard to EU structural funds when these funds are replaced by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund? Has the Scottish Government been made aware of this potential attack on devolved responsibilities by the Tory Government, who seem intent on taking the powers for dealing with such powers in future to themselves? This despite the view of the Finance and Constitution Committee in its October 19 report that powers currently exercised by the Scottish Government should categorically not be reduced.
Michael Russell.
Presiding Officer, Bruce Crawford asked a very good question. I think it is undoubtedly the case, so we have not been formally notified, that the UK Government intends to centralise the Shared Prosperity Fund, those funds that were used to be European funds, into their own hands and to remove responsibility from the devolved administrations. I think there's been a great deal of fear about that for some time, and as we're getting very close to the edge on this one, I think that is where things are going. That would be a major betrayal of the promises made to this chamber and to the other devolved assemblies when the referendum took place in June 2016, where there was a commitment given to increased powers. Not only have they not materialised, I believe that the powers have been, or there have been attempts to erode them, as we know, through the frameworks, and there will be further attempts to erode them. That would be utterly unacceptable. What we have to do is to stand firm against that. The UK government is hostile to the idea of devolution, hostile to the idea of powers being held elsewhere, and I have to say I would not trust them an inch.
Claire Baker, followed by Joan McAlpine.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is astonishing to see a Conservative government intent on acting against the expressed interests of business and, by refusing an extension, remain on a path which the majority of employers believe now more than ever will be damaging, potentially catastrophic for their businesses. This is a crucial month that we are facing. Has the Scottish Government had the opportunity to seek a consensus with other devolved parliaments so we can express a united view?
Michael Russell.
I think that is a sensible idea. We are considering how that might be done. We did it before, and I notice now that the Northern Irish Assembly has voted in favour of an extension, then I think we'll seek every opportunity we can to have that voice heard across the nations of the UK, and we will certainly take part in all such activities that we can. I don't share the members' astonishment at the Conservatives. I have to say that throughout the entire Brexit process, they have been heedless of the voice of business. They've been heedless of any reasonable voices, and they've been heedless of those people who've argued, for example, against ending freedom of movement. We're now seeing the results of that in Claire Baker's own region in Fife. She will have seen shortages of labour emerging. The whole thing has been done in an appalling manner because it's an appalling idea. But what we do need to do is to get a sense of rationality to stop things that are going to be even worse. And that means calling for an extension. And I suspect that the more sensible Conservatives, and there are some on the benches, more sensible Conservatives know that. It's just a pity, a great pity, they are not prepared to speak out, because by not speaking out, if this goes ahead, they will be damaging businesses in their own constituency and regions, causing unemployment, causing further economic shock.
Joan McAlpine, followed by Adam Tompkins.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Road Haulage Association recently warned that the UK was hopelessly unprepared for even a free trade agreement, let alone a no deal. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the effort required to prepare for an EU exit at the end of this year will not just be borne by government, but also by industry bodies and businesses, which are quite justifiably putting all their efforts into dealing with the impact of COVID-19?
Michael Russell.
There are massive costs involved in this for all the parties involved. Government, for example, apparently setting up the largest customs school in the world. That's being paid for by government. These are unnecessary costs. It's costing us far more to leave the EU than ever cost us for the benefits of membership. And the benefits of membership vastly outweighed anything we're going to get out of leaving. But that having been said, it is obvious that business will have to meet increased costs too. Absolutely obvious in terms of all the changes of processes and procedures. And that will be an additional cost, as the member rightly says, over and on top of the damage of COVID. It simply will not be able to be borne by some businesses. There's no doubt about that.
Adam Tompkins, followed by Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is a negotiation between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and it's clear that the SNP are on the side of the European Union and not on the side of Scottish fishermen when it comes to fisheries. So let me ask, whose side are they on when it comes to what Barnier calls the level playing field, but in truth is the loading of the dice in favour of the European Court of Justice? Is that another issue on which the SNP would just roll over and give the European Union whatever it wants?
Michael Russell.
I always think it's such a shame when I hear Professor Tompkins talking in those terms, because he knows that this is a foolish set of activities. And he also knows that the presentation he has just made is so far from the truth as to be risible. The reality of the situation is that we want to see if there's to be a settlement, a fair settlement. But we don't want to see Brexit in any case. I've never made any secret of that. Neither did Professor Tompkins. And indeed, nothing that has happened, not a single thing that has happened, has changed my mind, nor do I believe it has changed his mind. Unfortunately, what has changed his mind is the fact that the UK government are insisting on this foolish, disastrous course. So let me say this in terms of the level playing field. Quite clearly, there would be advantages if we remained in the single market and the customs union. We said that from the very outset. And if we did so, like other countries like Norway, we would be part of a level playing field and benefiting from the single market, rather than throwing away the advantages that we have as a member of a single market. There is something deeply flawed in an argument, which when you see how bad it is going to be, how disastrous it's going to be, how damaging it's going to be for the city of Glasgow that Mr. Tompkins is in his region, all he can do is parrot a Tory line.
Colin Beattie, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Does the Cabinet Secretary believe that adequate Brexit negotiations can take place before the current leave deadline, when the UK Government's focus must be on tackling the COVID-19 crises at this time?
Michael Russell.
I think the whole burden of my argument and the burden of the however many pages there are in the document is exactly to say no, it cannot be. It is obvious that it cannot be, and the UK Government should accept that now.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Stuart McMillan.
Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that calling for an extension does not mean that we're not leaving the EU, and it recognises that if a no deal was disastrous before COVID-19, it is acutely more now? And does the Cabinet Secretary, has he noted that 57% of leavers support a delay, and that is the pragmatic approach, the sensible approach, rather than the belligerence of UK negotiators, which actually are embarrassing the UK and Scotland and are doing nothing to actually represent those 57% of people who want a delay, who voted to leave the European Union they claim to act for?
Michael Russell.
Thank you for the figure. I think Oliver Mundell should read Mark and inwardly digest that figure, because it does completely blow out of the water one of his specious arguments. I have to say that in terms of a no deal or a low deal, both are equally bad, equally disastrous for Scotland and for the rest of the UK. I remain absolutely opposed to Brexit. I think it is an extraordinarily bad idea that has no virtue to it at all. But in these circumstances, my immediate concern is to make sure that the damage is made no worse by the irreversible action of refusing to apply for a delay. That delay will be required no matter the positioning. And I think that making sure that that delay takes place should be something that unites us across the chamber.
And the last question is from Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that a common sense approach to the timing of EU exit is well summarised by the Managing Director of the IMF, who said that the unprecedented uncertainty of COVID-19 means it would be wise not to add more on top of it?
Michael Russell.
It's absolutely clear that right across the board, both in the UK and elsewhere, across the world, throughout business, through commerce, in organisations, in government, The vast majority believe that a delay must be found, an extension must take place. That is in one corner. That tips the scales massively. But on the other scale is Boris Johnson, Cummings, and a few supporters like the ones we've heard today, who, for reasons either does not to lose political face, or for other reasons which are more nefarious, are determined to proceed. And that will have a cost for every single citizen of Scotland. And on their heads be it, presiding officer, if they refuse to heed the sensible advice we have given today, the voices across the chamber, and the very clear, comprehensive paper which we have published, and well sourced it is too.
That concludes questions on the Brexit statement, and we'll move on to the next item of business.